Nick and I met on a dating site called Bumble, which is a dating site where the female has to initiate the conversation. And I made some quip about the presidential primaries, which were happening at that point in time in 2016. And he thought it was funny. And so we struck up a conversation and met for the first time a few weeks later after I finished teaching at church on a Wednesday evening. And I was running late. I was sure that I had already shot my luck before I even showed up. But thankfully Nick was still there. And we ended up talking for 2.5 hours, way past my bedtime. I was yawning at the table, not because I didn't find him interesting, but because it was so late by the time we finished talking. And time just flew by. I remember thinking, oh my gosh, how could we possibly have just talked for 2.5 hours? It seems like I just sat down at this table. And our second date and our third date were the same, where I found interesting conversation and just very much enjoyed Nick's presence from the first moment that we met, and have been enjoying his presence ever since.
Our first date was at a little watering hole near the University of Texas campus, which was kind of my go-to spot for a lot of online dates. My older brother Chris told me a long time ago, the secret to dating is it's a volume game. The night I met Beth, she was pretty late, which was a pretty big turnoff for me, mostly because one time I waited on a date like this one for over an hour for a girl who never showed up, like some kind of sad doofus. I still don't think my self-respect has fully recovered from that, even though Beth was late. For some reason, I didn't leave. I think it was because I knew she was a graduate from Yale, and I always wanted to be able to say I went on a date with someone from Yale. I figured I could insert that into a lot of future conversations, which I have. Beth was pretty coy about what she did for a living. When she eventually showed up for our first date, she said that she was a teacher, which I guess was not exactly a lie. I think the apostles referred to Jesus as a teacher. On our third or fourth date, we were pretty deep into a bottle of wine, and I could tell that she wanted to tell me something, but she wasn't. And finally, she does this big reveal where she tells me she is a priest. She has pretty much gathered up all of her things and is ready to get up, expecting that that would be the end of this potential romance. She seemed genuinely surprised when I was kind of like, that's your big secret? That you're a priest? From there, our romance blossomed. We both loved food and became authorities on the best tacos in Austin. She took me to several concerts, and I didn't even think I liked concerts, but I guess I liked concerts with Beth. It turned out that we were a pretty good team in the kitchen. I would cook, we would eat way too much food, she would clean up the mess, and assure me that this arrangement could go on for a very...
The thing that most clearly defines dating Nick Franklin is that it is delicious. I think it was our fourth date when he asked if I liked gumbo and if he could cook me some gumbo. And at that moment in time, I remember telling my friends, I don't know who this guy is, but I'm totally into it. And it was the most delicious gumbo I've ever had. Still one of my favorite dishes that he continues to make.
When I started telling friends and family that I was dating a priest who went to Yale, they kept looking at me pretty funny. I thought it was because they didn't believe me that I could land a Yale graduate. Or more likely, they were looking at me funny because I was probably one of the least religious people they knew. But it turned out most of them thought only men could be priests. And so when I said I was dating a priest, they seemed to think that story should come with an additional announcement. I figured out eventually I needed to tell people I was dating a lady priest who went to Yale. And sure enough, those funny looks stopped. There were a few clues that Beth seemed to like me as much as I liked her. She watched really violent TV shows with me even though I knew she hated them. I really had a clue she was serious when I told her my favorite novel was Lonesome Dove, and she read it, the whole thing, all 1,200 pages. And then she watched the movie with me, all 7 hours. The other clue was when Beth invited herself to Thanksgiving in Booker. I'm not sure she knew exactly what she was getting herself into. It was a 9-hour drive that turned into a 12-hour drive after I left my cell phone on top of the car by accident. And we had to backtrack 90 miles. I was sure Beth would be pretty put out by it, but instead she was the one who insisted we go back and get it. She has a real patience and carefree attitude that comes in handy. Maybe more handy than she would like.
So within the first year that we were dating, I invited myself to Thanksgiving at Nick's family's home in Booker, Texas. I was half joking, but not really. I think I was really, really curious about this wonderful relationship with his family that Nick had talked about, and I wanted to see it for myself. I didn't have plans for that Thanksgiving, so I thought, well, the worst he could say is no. In fact, he said yes. Just totally fell in love with his family and the place that he is from. So I wouldn't say I left Booker that year knowing that I wanted to marry him, but I definitely left feeling more confident that he really was the real deal. He was who he said he was. And it was not just him, but it was this package deal with this fabulous family.
I actually got to meet the McGills before Beth had met my family because I went to her brother Jay's wedding in Maine. I could tell Beth was pretty nervous about me meeting her family, which I think is natural, but her nervousness made me nervous. I wondered if Dad had run off all her old boyfriends. I mean, why is this really beautiful, amazing woman who went to Yale still available? The reality is the McGills are the kindest and most generous people in my whole life. John and Susan would give a stranger the shirt off their back. I always heard stories about terrible in-laws, but they are the opposite. If I were imagining the perfect family to marry into, I don't even think I could come up with the McGills. It'd just be too over the top to hope for. That, however, didn't make it any easier when I got ready to ask John's permission to marry Beth. I was hoping the tradition of asking for permission from the father to marry his daughter had died out, but I didn't really have a choice because we originally planned to use John's mother's wedding ring for our engagement, and John had the ring. Despite all of my nervousness, when I did ask John for his permission, not only did he say yes, but his eyes lit up and he could not have been more excited. Seeing him that happy that evening is not something I will ever forget. We ended up not using Beth's grandmother's ring after all, but as soon as the ring I bought arrived, I packed all my things and hightailed it from Texas to Virginia.
Essentially, I arrived on a Sunday, Nick arrived on a Wednesday, and he proposed on Friday. He did it in the perfect way. He cooked a delicious steak dinner. As I was getting ready to wash the dishes from dinner in our sink that was all backed up, he closed the doors to the dining room and said, "I have a surprise for you. Don't look in here for a minute." And so I'm griping about the dishwasher. Meanwhile, he has gotten roses, yellow roses, and chocolate from the grocery store and had hidden them in the car and also had the ring. After I finished moaning and griping and doing the dishes, he ushered me into the dining room, proposed to me right there. It was perfect because it was us, it was after a delicious meal, and it was in our new home. I couldn't have imagined anything better.
Over the last week, I've been reflecting on how crazy this all still feels to be getting married. My thoughts kept going back to a line I read in Roger Ebert's memoir. Like me, he waited a long time to get married, explaining that before he met his wife, he didn't think of himself as a bachelor so much as a soloist. I spent most of my life feeling the same way. And then I met Beth. I mentioned before that Lonesome Dove is my favorite book and also my favorite movie. But my favorite part of Lonesome Dove is the scene where two main characters, Augustus McCrae and Woodrow Call, are sitting on a creek in their old age, and Augustus asks Woodrow, "When were you the happiest?" Classic Woodrow doesn't have an answer, but Augustus knows exactly what the answer is for him. I've thought often about the answer to that question, when was I the happiest? For a long time I've had the same answer, but tomorrow I'm going to look down the aisle and see Beth walking towards me, ready to marry me. And I'll have a new answer.